Well, hello there from Seal Island. We are more than 20 miles out into the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Maine, which is back that way. So I am a researcher with Project Puffin. My name is Stacey Hollis, and I've actually been coming out here a few seasons back starting in 2003. I was here hopping around to all the islands in '03. Project Puffin manages 7 seabird nesting islands, and I came back in 2005 and stayed here on Seal Island for the entire season because this is one of my most favorite places on Earth. I'm thrilled to be back, and last year I was here for the whole season. I got to experience Project Puffin with Wi-Fi for the first time, because back when we didn't even know what Wi-Fi was, and now here I am being able to talk to you all live from the island, and it's thrilling. So just over the rise at the end of the island there is where we have all of our terns and puffins nesting. We have common and Arctic terns and Atlantic puffins. So I am here for the post-season. All of the terns and puffins have pretty much left. They've all gone. It's been a week or so now, and we're actually here staying on the island for the past couple weeks to look out for the late nesting great and double-crested cormorants, which actually nest down on the southern end of the island. They hadn't all yet fledged, and the issue is that as soon as we humans leave the island, it's our presence here that deters predators, and that's specifically for the cormorants are the bald eagles. And so we check in on the cormorants multiple times a day. We walk down, it's about a mile to the end of the island, and make sure that these eagles are staying at bay. And it's a great time because it's the fall migration. We've got all kinds of really neat birds coming through as they're passing southward, and we do shorebird surveys. We asked anyone who was interested to send in questions, because here on the island we have several cameras. That is the reason we have Wi-Fi on the island. Limited bandwidth nonetheless, but hopefully you're sticking with me. Many of you are fans of to see the little nestling pufflings as they hatch and grow up and fledge. It's really fun interacting with y'all commenters who we love, and I know you guys love these puffins. I can see by your passion, and it's such a pleasure interacting with y'all. So we've got a puffin burrow cam and then a loafing ledge cam. We call it loafing when the birds sit around on the rocks, and that's the time when they socialize and rest, and so you get to really get some really good close-ups of these beautiful birds. And there's the boulder berm, which looks out over a whole bunch of boulders down in which there are many, many puffin burrows. And those, that gives you a chance to not just see the birds loafing, but also flying in with fish when they're feeding their young. And then at the end of the season, the exciting thing is to keep an eye out for the fledglings, the birds, the chicks that have now grown to the age where they are going to first leave the burrow, which is the only time they leave the burrow, and they don't come back. And that happens at night. The birds will leave their nest and head out into the Atlantic, and it's very neat. Explore has, night vision on the cameras so that our faithful watchers can keep an eye out for cam viewers. Will keep an eye on the cams all night, and we've got some that'll record the actual fledge of a puffin coming out of the burrow and just stumbling along over the boulders and just disappearing off into the sea. And it's super exciting. We don't know where they're gonna really go because we've only just started learning about what happens to these birds over the course of the winter. Puffins actually spend most of their lives out to sea, only coming to land to nest, which will be about 3 or 4 months of their year. And all the rest of the year they're out to sea. And we have, through Project Puffin, there have been, what are they called? Geolocators, which are radio transmitters that, after catching a puffin, an adult puffin, we were able to put on some of these bands that collect the information about where these birds go. We can only do it to a few of them, but the ones that we're able to retrieve years later are hopefully as soon as possible after they've come back for the next nesting season. We're hoping, we've gotten information about where several birds have gone, and it's pretty neat to learn that they actually do spend their winters. They first go north to, oh goodness, I forget the name. They head west out off of the continental shelf, which is kind of off of Cape Cod in New York, way out to sea over the continental shelf, and they just float out there and gather fish and survive what must be a freezing wet experience for months and months, and this includes those babies that have just only first experienced the world a month or so before. So yeah, so it's pretty exciting to think about what these birds are doing, and as we're studying them here, we're keeping track of their populations. We're putting bands on them to see if they return, and monitoring their nesting success and productivity, and getting an idea of how these birds are doing out here, because they are a keystone species. They reflect the health of our oceans, and especially in the light of climate change, we're finding some really interesting things, and we wouldn't know about them if we weren't sitting in those blinds watching the kinds of fish that are coming in, the size of the fish, the shape of the fish that are being fed to these birds, and that varies over the years, and so it can help give us clues as to what's happening out there, because we're the only ones looking at this size of fish, these baby fish that are maybe 2 or 3 inches long, getting this idea of what's out there, and it changes. Like if it's a warm winter, it can really change what fish these birds are bringing in, and we've seen that in the past, especially as you may have known about the 2012 year, where it was a big butterfish year, because of the temperature of the waters that winter. And so that ended up really affecting the productivity of the colony that year. It really hurt the nesting success. So, and just seeing the changes, the trends of what fish are being brought in, it takes many years worth of hard work looking at what's happening out here. And so being a part of this research is something that I feel enormously privileged to be able to take part in, and to be out here in such a beautiful place means more to me than I can even describe. But once again, so here you have the colony, and as you may see, there's a couple of herring gulls flying by. That's another big reason we're out here, is to keep these predatory gulls from eating during the nesting season. They'll just feast on the chicks, because especially the tern chicks are very vulnerable out on the top of the land, so their nests will be in between the rocks in the grasses, and they're like sitting ducks, and so we end up having to, just our very presence here helps keep these birds at bay, and if we weren't here every season, this island would turn fully back into gulls. We wouldn't have the diversity of not just terns and puffins, but guillemots and razorbills. We have murres come onto the island. We have spotted sandpipers that nest, and just all different species, and the biodiversity of the place is very rich here. And so anyways, I think I'm getting a little wordy here, but I'm just having fun. So I have a list of some of the questions. So like I said, I'm here for the postseason, and so I wasn't able to get all the news on Willie and Billy and Conrad, but I do have a few questions here that I might be able to help you with. The first one being, now that Willie and Billy are banded, we need physical characteristics to tell them apart. Are there any characteristics noted about them? Well, actually the bands themselves, if we can get a look at them when they're crawling in and out of the burrows, is the best characteristic. But as far as how to tell the two parents apart, the biggest thing, and this isn't always easy to tell, is the size of the beak, and that the bird might be a little bit bigger. This would be the male. The male would have a little bit bigger of a beak. And yeah, but otherwise it would just be a matter of being lucky enough to read those bands, and I know in a cramped burrow like that it might be difficult. So Billy and Willie seem, these are the parents, by the way, in the burrow this year. We've actually had a change over the years as to who's in the burrows. We've got merlins flying around. They've been trying to eat the flickers all day. Sorry, birds. You can hear them. Here they go. They're after the flicker. I don't know if you can see that, but anyways, yeah, so Billy and Willie are the parents in the burrow this year, and they had Conrad, and it was a successful fledge. He grew up. Y'all got to see him. Fun. He's just a little puffball. That's what we call him, and they're just adorable when they're little. So Billy and Willie seemed very confused and upset when they couldn't find Conrad back at the burrow. This would be after he fledged. Apparently Billy had held on to the fish for an hour, and Willie stayed in the hidey hole for like 8 hours. Are these normal reactions from puffin parents? Well, seeing as how it's difficult even to get a camera in a burrow in the first place. It has to have the right lighting. It has to be in a place that won't bother the puffins. So there haven't been that many views of what goes on in the puffin burrow, especially in a time like after a fledge. So as far as we know, maybe this is normal, maybe it's not, but I think that what would happen is Billy just didn't get the message that Conrad had fledged and wasn't about to drop that fish, so he's just kind of sitting around wondering, maybe he was a first-time parent, or she, I don't know who's he and she, but yeah, I think it's just a learning experience, and it was nice of him to wait around for an hour, and apparently Willie stayed in the hidey hole for 8 hours. Well, another thing that Steve brought up in his talk this year on Explore, Steve Kress, the director of Project Puffin, who you can learn all about at projectpuffin.audubon.org, is that when, at the end of the season, the birds with established burrows, because burrows are a hot commodity, especially a good one like that one, is going to want to stick around for a while. They're going to take on this burrow. Because they're kind of, all the new birds, or newly mating birds, are always keeping an eye out for a good burrow. And so if somebody at the end of the summer came sliding in and saw an empty burrow, they might click in on that being their burrow for next year. And so by staying in the burrow like Willie did for 8 hours, he might have just been marking his territory in case any other puffins coming through saw that burrow and took a peek in. If it was empty, Willie couldn't say, "Hey, this is my pad." So that might have been why he was doing that. Do we know the sex of Willie and Billy yet? As far as I know, there might have been some kind of DNA sampling techniques. I don't know if it was blood or feathers or what, but we can check in on that and I can get back to you about it. Like I said, I wasn't here for the season, but I'm so glad that it was a successful puffin cam season, because that's always fun. Alright, so next we have, is it known whether or not pufflings, that's what the baby puffins are called, might congregate for their journey out to sea? Well, it's hard to know what happens with the pufflings because we're not necessarily going to put a geolocator on them just because you don't want to put something on them when they're just brand new to the world. It might be a little bit much for a brand new puffin. So we don't really know what they do when they get out there. Seeing as how they're social birds, it wouldn't be surprising if they stuck with other pufflings, but we don't know. There isn't any provisioning, meaning the parents don't wait out there and feed the babies. The babies are pretty much on their own after they fledge, as far as we know. And so what we're hoping is that it's a good year, that the bird gets good provisioning and has a good store of reserves, so that if it does get out there and, you know, if the parents aren't around, or because the parents aren't around, that it has plenty of fat stored on it, that it can take its time and figure out what it's doing and start to find those fish so that it can make it happily through the winter. Let's see. When the chicks fledge, do they remain with the colony? Do they stay in the sea nearby? Okay. Where do the pufflings spend time during the nesting season? I think that was the not the pufflings, but the young puffins that are not breeding. We do actually see non-breeders loafing, so sitting around on the rocks. And you can tell them because they're a little bit shady instead of the bright white, and their beaks are sometimes a little smaller and definitely not as brightly colored as the adult puffins. But they'll hang out and loaf. You don't see them quite as often, but since they're not nesting, they probably are more just out fishing. Let's see, because it does take them about 4 or 5 years before they start breeding, and so they're looking for mates and just keeping their bellies full. Are there any puffins remaining? If not, when was the last fledge, and when did the last puffin leave? As far as I know, there was a fledge that was recorded on the Boulder Berm cam by one of the viewers, that happened on the 26th of August, I believe. And we still saw some puffins feeding, bringing in food to some of the boulders over here closer to camp. That happened on, I think it was the 2nd. It was the 2nd of this month, September. And so that was the last time we saw a puffin out here. And right around then, too, just a smattering of terns. But comparatively, it is quiet here because it is the fall and everybody has moved on. And yeah, it's a whole different experience when you come out in the fall. So you're not hearing. I mean, you would just see terns everywhere. You would hear them quite well right here. Are the gray seals still out frolicking, or are they waiting for everyone to leave so they can hang out on the shore? Well, so here's what happens in the winter. Explore.org has a camera up. You might be able to see it. It's there's a big solar panel just out there in the middle of the field, and attached to it is the camera. This is still on. Yeah. For the seal cam, because this is called Seal Island for a good reason. It's the 2nd largest gray seal pupping colony in the United States. And so the gray seals are, first off, they're huge, and you see them out here in the water. But over the winter is when they haul out onto the island, and they don't just get onto the shore. They come up all the way up, and they will just be covering all this area to have their pups. And I think the reason is that they come up so high is because the winter can produce some pretty mad storms, and so they're trying to get up as high as they can to be protected, and their pups are probably pretty vulnerable, so they come up pretty high, and we definitely find remnants of that activity when we come back in the spring. But yeah, so if you tune in, I think it's December or so, that the cameras will go live again, and it'll be that one there that you can see behind me, that'll show the pups, or the gray seals, and see them have their pups over the course of the winter, and this place looks completely different. It's pretty wild, so that's definitely worth checking in on. And let's see, so... Oh, but I did want to say, so the gray seals, they keep an eye on you. So when we go out and do our shorebird surveys, I'm on the island right now with Frank, who's another researcher out here. He's supervised Matinicus and Stratton Island for many years, actually. And so when we go out and do our surveys, sometimes you'll just be walking down the island, look over, and have, like 30 huge heads sticking out of the water staring at you. And so it's pretty wild. I've taken some Instagram Stacey bird if you want to see a big old crowd of seals follow me along. I was singing to them, so maybe they liked it. I don't know. How long has this project been underway, and what are its future goals? Well, so this project, Steve Kress started it. It was 73, I believe. And what had happened was that there was a great decline due to overhunting, the millinery trade as well, which used bird feathers for ladies' hats, that really hit the seabird populations along this coast really hard, and so puffins were nearly extirpated, which means they were made locally extinct from off the coast of Maine. And so what Steve Kress ended up doing was reintroducing healthy breeding populations of these birds back to Maine and off the coast of Maine. And so Newfoundland, and get baby puffins out of burrows up in Newfoundland, because up there they were they had healthy populations that he could take about 100 birds a year for, I don't know, like 7 years or so, and put them in artificial burrows that he dug on Eastern Egg Rock, which is down in Booth Bay Harbor, which is where it all began, and Seal Island as well a few years later. So raising these baby puffins in artificial burrows, feeding them fish, and allowing them to grow up, and just like any other puffin, it wouldn't have, well, these guys saw the light of day before they, but yeah, so they ended up fledging, and year after year they kept bringing on a new batch of babies and raising them and letting them fledge, and just fingers crossed, hope they'd come back. And then one fateful day, I think Steve was on Eastern Egg Rock and saw a puffin with fish, and I think the feeling he must have had, which now has turned into hundreds. This year especially has been a record year for the number of nesting puffin pairs on Eastern Egg and Seal Island, hundreds and hundreds of birds. And it's just completely changed these islands. They're entirely beautiful, diverse islands that have these extremely healthy populations of puffins nesting on them. So it's pretty exciting. But he's written a book, it's called The Project Puffin Story, which if you check that out, you can find it on their website, and also myfeathersawry.wordpress.com. I've done a review of the book, but it's just these really passionate researchers that made it so that I can come here and experience this and feel enormously proud to be a part of. So it's pretty phenomenal. I don't know what my time frame or anything on this is, but so how is it funded? So, I mean, I know that a lot of it is donations. I know there are adopt-a-puffins, so you can adopt a puffin and get word throughout the season on how it's doing and if it's been seen. There are also, there's the Project Puffin has a store in Rockland, and yeah, it's just a matter of, it's anything that we can do, because to be able to keep coming out here and keeping the gulls from taking over the island is so important. So we rely on a lot of passionate people that support us and make this be able to continue. Let's see. I lost my place. Oh, how can people support or get involved? So if you go to projectpuffin.audubon.org, it has the information on how you can get involved, how you could donate or adopt a puffin. So yeah, so there's volunteer opportunities, so you can always try that, especially people who have experience with handling birds. So yeah, there are definitely ways, so check that out. Is there a database, and can we access it to check on past fledglings? Well, actually, we do have a very specialized seabird database, seabird banding database. I forget what it's exactly called, but it's specifically started by us, by Project Puffin, and is connected to, I guess, the BBL laboratory. I'm not quite sure, but what we end up doing is a lot of our time is out in the blinds, what's called reciting bands, and so we sit in the little blinds on a bucket with a little pad and have our scope, so our basically like a telescope for birds, and peeking through that at little tern legs and puffin legs and try to read those bands. And if you've seen on the cameras, especially on the loafing ledge, when you can see those birds standing close by, it's even hard to see the bands right there when they're right next to the camera. But yeah, so, and they never stop moving, and so it's always a challenge. It's one of my favorite things to do, actually, is get a full band. It's such a satisfying feeling, is reading the numbers on the band, which have a specific identifying number that was recorded and is now in the database, or was as soon as it was put on that bird. And so then you can go into the seabird database as a researcher, we can, and enter when we've seen it again. And so there ends up being a record for each bird and when it's been seen again and where it's been seen. And so yeah, so these bands end up being entered, and we're able to kind of keep an eye on not just the bird itself, but like where exactly it's going. Say if it's gonna end up nesting in a different location, and the movement of these birds can be recorded just based on who saw it from where. So it's pretty interesting. So when you all are watching on the cams, if you see and are able to read a good portion of the band, especially if it's the field readable, which is on the left leg, which will be a more easy to identify number. I think it's 2 letters over 2 numbers or something, something a lot less than the, I don't know, 8 numbers on the BBL band, which is on the left, or the right side, that is just, it's a little more difficult to get that number, so that's why field readables were created. So anyways, so if you see a band that you get a good amount of the number, you can let us know, because we keep an eye on the comments, and to be able to kind of work with you guys, we could be able to find out what bird it is that you identified, and maybe where it was banded, and if it was banded as a chick or an adult, and where it's been seen, what locations it's been recited from. So, what else? How is climate change impacting the puffins and other seabirds of Seal Island? Well, that's because you can't just look at something for one season and have all the answers. It's a matter of diligence and continued research to be able to look at trends, especially. And one of the big things that we look at is these fish coming in that the birds are feeding their young. And that can tell us a lot, just because it's all a matter of these fish are there because they require a certain temperature of water. And if, like, certain fish that are more cold water species are being affected and might not be brought in as much one year if it's a warmer winter, and so those fish might have headed further north or deeper where it's colder, and in effect we end up getting, sometimes we get the species coming in from the south as a result, and because of warmer waters. So just like that butterfish year, that was as a result of a warm winter. And so where one year doesn't tell us all the answers, it does, if we can back up and look at these trends over time, which is why we sit out there in blinds for 3 hours saying, okay, that bird brought that fish and it was that size and it went in that chick's mouth, and this species of fish, and this information collected over all of these years is what's going to help tell us what these birds are experiencing in regard to climate change. So yeah, this is kind of the first-hand view of what's going on out there. Which one is the one you enjoy watching the most? Thanks for all you do. Well, thank you. Okay, well, my favorite research thing, I would say, would be, it's fun to recite bands. Like I said, it's very satisfying when you get a full one. And also just to find out where that bird was banded, and the information that you provide to help add to science in that way, and figure out where these birds are if they're jumping between islands, and even to be able to type it into the computer and be like, oh, I banded that back in 2005. Like, that information will come up, and so it's pretty exciting. And then, of course, it's the chick check. That's what we do right around, I guess it's in between our blind stints when we're doing the reciting or the feeding studies. We go out and check out the productivity plots, which this is, I'm thinking the turns right now, is where we go out and we weigh and measure the chicks. Well, first we see if we have plots that have been pre-implemented before the birds start nesting, and they're just little short fences, and within those fences we count all the nests, and then we keep track of them throughout the course of the season. And this is the same that we do with the puffins as well, is we check certain burrows throughout the season to determine the productivity, because all of this information is telling us, it's giving us a view of a fraction of the colony to extrapolate that onto how the population is. We get to band the chicks, we weigh them, we measure them, we take their cute little wings and do the wing chord, and yeah, just seeing these little birds dealing with the elements is phenomenal, for one thing. And you really experience nature, not just looking at it, but understanding kind of what it is that these birds go through. It's just, I'm sitting here like freezing in the wind right now, but imagine a little chick that would have to go through something like this. It doesn't have an extra jacket it can put on. But yeah, it's just really all of the work. All of the work is really wonderful. Reaching your hands into the burrows and feeling a puffball, fuzzy little puffin, and pulling it out and putting a band on it, and watching it grow throughout this season, and one day reaching in and finding nobody there, and just knowing that he's out to sea somewhere, and carrying on the next stage of his life is pretty fantastic. Yeah, and terns are kind of a important one in my heart. I don't know what it is about them. They're just they're feisty, I guess, and just gorgeous. Such gorgeous birds. If you don't know, they're some people would see a tern and think it's a gull, but these guys, they've got pointy, sharp beaks that we have to wear hats with flags sticking out because they'll dive at you. They're really important for the puffins, because the terns nest on the top of the colony and the puffins nest in the rocks around the perimeter closer down to the water. And anytime there's a gull or a predator that comes, they just mob whatever predator it is and try to get them to leave as soon as possible. And so they're feisty. They're really cool birds, and they're just gorgeous. But like those puffins, they've got my heart as well. So it's hard to even say which is my favorite. Okay, so I'll carry on. What's a normal day like at Seal Island? How long will you be on the island this year? Well, out here in the fall season, it's pretty quiet. We get our cormorant checks and our seabird surveys, and I'm trying to keep up with my blog and writing for Wildlands, which is a great organization that I'm able to blog for, and just write about what it is that we do out in field work like this. And so as a writer, this is a great time to be on the island, because I'm able to do it when we're not closing up shop here, which we'll be doing the next few days. So I'm only here for 2 weeks this year. Last year I was out, I opened Egg Rock, and that was the first couple weeks, and then stayed on Seal Island until the fall, into the fall. So I'm just getting the tail end this year. What is it about this place that keeps you coming back? How did you get this gig, and what would you tell young people who are interested in having adventures like you are having? 1 second. So the thing that keeps me coming back, there's nothing better than this. This is a diverse island that there's always something to see. And even when you're in your tent, there's things going on that you can hear. You always know when something's going on, because you get tuned into the elements, obviously, but also just hearing the birds, and if something sounds different and your ears perk up, you can become almost wild yourself because you're so connected to it. And I feel most at home out in nature, and you kind of get a chance to relate to what these birds are going through, and feel like you're going through something pretty phenomenal as well. I was here in 2005 during the nor'easter, and we had, I guess it was 60-some miles an hour winds, and you're watching the birds out there dealing with it, and you're trying to keep your tent from collapsing on you. And yeah, it's a phenomenal experience. So yeah, I can't help but keep coming back, and I feel so connected to this place. And yeah, I've met some of the most amazing people in field jobs like these. You really get to know other human beings when you're working with them 24/7 and living in such a remote place. It's pretty beautiful. So yeah, I got this gig. I've been interested in birds since before I can even remember. Apparently my first word was duck. And just, I have always had my eyes on them. Even as a baby, I watched it just blew up from there, and it was not a fad. So, if you're interested in these kind of things, in nature, in wildlife, do anything you can to get out there and learn about them. I went on these bird walks, and the people that I would go birding with taught me everything. And you just kind of, when it's your passion, you suck it in and absorb all of that, and it just ends up kind of turning into something, or at least when you want it to, you make it into something. And so I ended up pursuing volunteer jobs. That's a big thing, is volunteer. Go find your local banding station and learn how to band a bird. And once you start getting your hands on them, that experience will look good on your resume to get the next job. So definitely. Do I plan on doing research at any other locations? Anytime. I actually have gone, Project Puffin in '03 was my first field job, and after that I worked with smooth-billed anis, with burrowing owls, with warblers and woodpeckers, in salt marshes, and like I said, the more you have your hands on birds, the better experience, the more is on your resume that you can move on to learn more things and get new research jobs. And so it blossoms. And so but yeah, I always want to keep my one foot in the field if possible. I am currently working on St. Paul Island, Alaska, Pribilof Islands, where there are more than 230 species of migrating seabirds, including common murres, crested auklets, tufted and horned puffins, cormorants, and red-legged kittiwakes. That sounds lovely. Seabird productivity has been declining over the years here and is at its lowest today, not to mention the northern fur seal populations. My question to you is, how is the seabird population faring on Seal Island compared to other populations around the planet? And is there a correlation between the status of the populations? So I know that, let's see, in the UK it sounds like puffin populations are declining, but these are puffin colonies that are vastly larger than ours. So I think proportionally they are experiencing quite a decline. I'm not quite sure what that's a result of, but I can take some guesses. But as far as how that correlates with Seal Island here, I think a lot of it is just what's going on in those oceans, because the birds go where there's over as many as we can get, because the more years of data, the better we can look at the trends and see what it is that's and relate those trends to other things that are going on. We keep track of sea temperature. We do daily sea temperature and weather, and so all this information together, there's so many variables, of course, and so that's why, once again, it's so important to take the steps back to be able to look at the big picture. And so yeah, it's a question, that's for sure. It's obvious that the data from Project Puffin is invaluable to better understand the ecosystem, but how does your experience on Seal Island personally affect you? Well, I think I got into that already, and you can see that I'm enjoying talking about my love for this place, but yeah, it's just seeing nature firsthand, because it's a whole different experience than just going for a hike, but rather living in it and seeing it make it through the season, and seeing how the weather can affect these birds, and what they're dealing with possible effects from climate change, and just being here firsthand to see what's going on is what makes it so fascinating, because, and especially having been here in '03 and '05 and again in 2016, to see the changes in the time I've been here, because there are changes. And so, like, to hear the different kinds of fish that have been, that is what I think is the most important about what I do, is and what we all do here at Project Puffin, is just taking down this information and looking at the changes and monitoring the trends. So to be a part of that is something that I am wildly proud of and just very thankful for the opportunity of. Let's see. Out of all the things you do on the island from day to day, what is your favorite research thing that you enjoy? That would have been the chick check and the band reciting and all this. Oh, I think this was just a repeat. Sorry about that. Is the foundation doing anything to prevent overfishing, protect their habitat, and how to assist them for the effect of global warming? Yeah, so Project Puffin, I don't think there's anything we're actively doing about overfishing. I think the biggest thing is education and awareness, and so to be publishing research and contributing to just getting the word out about what's going on out here, what we're seeing, and some of that is because of overfishing and habitat availability and all of this. I think the greatest thing, and this is why I actually went into communications. I went from an undergrad in biology to a grad degree in journalism. And so by becoming a science communicator, an environmental journalist, is my way of kind of trying to connect the two worlds and showing what it is we're seeing here from the island out to all you all, and not just the cute puffin babies, but maybe also like the sad things, because like it's not all, what is the word? I don't know. It's just, it can be hard out here to see some of the effects of predation and changes in food supply and weather affecting these birds. And so by writing about it in my blog, I am hoping to reach out and show people that we're not just frolicking around through a cute little seabird colony. There's a lot going on here that needs to be conveyed to the wider public, and I encourage all of you all to share that, to share what you learn. It's great to kind of like pull the people in with the cute puffin, but then to kind of give the background and give a greater idea of what it is that we're doing here and we're finding out and what we're seeing and what we're learning and how we can make a difference. But the main key thing is just education, getting greater awareness about this and how it not only how it affects the birds, but how it relates to us, and what we're doing and how we can maybe approach the way we live. Thrilled to work with you all and to talk with you all, and check in with me on the comments. I'm at Stacebird, and I'd love to keep this conversation going, and I encourage you all to keep an eye on the cameras, because there's lots more to come. So yeah, I really appreciate y'all being here, and this was really fun. Hopefully I answered your questions to a satisfying degree, but I think I'm going to get out of the wind now. It's a little bit chilly, so I wish you all a lovely afternoon, and yeah, thanks for watching. Take care, y'all. Bye.